Okay, it's time for another episode of Go Talk. Today I have Keith Arnold, the honorable, honorary Keith Arnold.
There you go.
How are you, Keith?
Fine. How are you?
I'm doing well. Keith is a very big member, I feel, in the Go community, and he's been with it relatively early, and there's a lot of stuff I want to talk to you about, and that I think is really interesting. So, how are you doing today?
All right. All right. Doing fine.
And let's start with the Go community. I know, when did you sort of first start out really interacting with the Go community?
I learned to play when I was in college, but really started interacting with it on a regular basis when I finished school around 1985.
Okay. And what was it like when you first started out with the community? Like, how easy was it to find a game? How easy was it to find clubs? Things like that.
Well, it was. I don't think it was much different than it is today in terms of finding clubs, other than perhaps you might be a little bit more difficult to search for them. You didn't have the internet
Right.
to find where your local club is, but there were generally reasonably the same number of clubs at that time, at least certainly on the East Coast, which is where I was.
Right.
The Go activity in the country and more specifically organized American Go Association
Mm.
activity was a good bit centered on the East Coast, from Boston down to Northern Virginia, and pretty thoroughly covered for that region. There was a strong group of people in Cleveland, and there was people in Seattle and San Francisco,
Hmm.
and a little bit around Denver, and we're kind of done. That was kind of the country of Go. There was a lot of activity in Southern California, but it was not as closely affiliated
Right.
as it is today. Um, and of course, there weren't wasn't the kind of interaction, because it was much more difficult to communicate and to interact in those days. Um,
Definitely. I remember. I think one of the Go congresses, they were selling the old e-journal, not e-journals, but the actual Go journals, and I've looked through them, and one of the really early ones, when they were publishing it, the the funny thing that they would do was they would actually publish the numbers, names, and addresses of people who were actually registered, and I thought that was it must have been such a much completely different fraternity of people who played.
Right. You had to have a phone number and call someone up, and you didn't have a Google Maps to find out how to get there and so forth. So once you if you were lucky enough to find the AGA, it was relatively easy, but still nowhere near as easy as it is today because of the better information and communication we have. And for the most part, I think the AGA has done a decent job of having that information out there
Right.
if you're looking for it. The struggle is always getting information out to people who aren't necessarily looking for it.
Yeah, I think right now, with all the news that's been happening, it's definitely been spreading a lot more, and the traffic is really helping out with that. And it's great to have just a place now with a website just to be able to find it. Was it easy for you to find clubs and stuff? Or
Well, I found a club fairly close to where I lived with my parents.
mm-hmm,
Being When I first learned to play, I was in college, and then through law school, I'm an attorney.
mm-hmm,
Um, and so when I was home, there was a club that was reasonably close that I could get to, the Greater Washington Club in Kensington.
mm,
Um, when I was in law school, it was a little more difficult. I didn't have a car,
mm-hmm,
and the Baltimore Go Club met outside of Baltimore. I was fortunate enough to have a chess playing friend. The Baltimore Go Club met at the same time as a chess club, and I rode on the back of his motorcycle many a Friday night, so I could get out and play at the Baltimore Club while the chess player and I were both in law school. Um, so I actually took the bus home often from that because the guy with the I'm just remembering this now. The guy with the motorcycle actually lived near the Go Club.
Oh,
So I had to take the bus back downtown. But at least I got a ride out.
nice. And with something like that, I think now we get a lot of different interesting foot traffic at our club. I think now with the news and then just how it's permeated through the media in terms of like movies and just I think you sometimes see it on TV shows and things. What was it like back then? Like with would people show up to a club and say, "Oh, I've heard about this," or would they be just genuinely curious, or was it mostly just people who already knew what it was and
Well,
sh-
certainly at the clubs I had experience with, one was in the basement of a church, and one was in a community activity room at a elementary school.
Mhm.
And so, in both those cases, you didn't show up there unless you were looking for it.
Oh, I see.
So we didn't have the club experience of someone walking in and not knowing what the game was about.
Mhm.
But you would have the everyday experience, if you're studying with a board someplace on a campus or in an airport or reading a book, you would get those questions. And it was almost universal in those days that people had no
Hmm.
idea what you're doing. Now, I think more than often than not, the people kind of can buy a vowel and they are pretty close to having some sense that they've seen this before. It's permeated the outer membrane a lot more. The number of people that play has also increased, but we're still way behind in terms of getting more people to play. But people at least know what the game is on a much more frequent basis now.
Mhm. And I think, considering how many years it's been, what are some major changes that you've seen in the Go community since then? Just in terms of any aspect of it.
I think the biggest change has to be, well, I'll say the biggest change. There's been some changes in terms of money. I mean, we went through years of having the Ing sponsorship,
Mm-hmm.
and we've had a lot more active monetary interest from the Asian countries in trying to do things here. These things were not going on when I started out. The
Oh.
best thing you would have when I started out were um, a pair or a few pros might do a tour of clubs and do some simuls and pass through and do some lessons. But beyond that, we were really on our own. Um, so first the Ing money and now some of the other sources of money that we've had certainly make a difference, and in most instances a positive one. But the biggest change is the internet. I mean, that's the biggest difference, both for good, and it's obviously predominantly good,
Right.
but also for bad. I think that the good is obvious. Any of us who play, I mean, let's face it, I've seen some of your programs, and they're great because I'm a Go player and I'm interested in these things. But
Right.
if you're not a Go player, I'm not sure how interesting this would be. But clearly, being able to play anytime is fantastic. I think it's really increased the level of play. It's enabled people to actually make a living in this country,
Oh, yeah, that's right.
teaching online, and it's had many positive attributes. We're much more connected. We and this goes hand in hand also, although I think less significantly, with email and websites and communicating about clubs and so forth in that respect.
Right.
But the big thing is the being able to play online with people. And I think, in the olden days, in the old codger that I am, the Go Congress was unbelievably great, and you've been to Go Congresses, of course, and we love going to the Go Congress. But it was different when I was there. When I first started going to Go Congresses, it was incredible. You were playing Go every day for a week with lots of people around, lots of people your strength. It was the only time that happened to you at all. Yeah. Whereas now, you could save a lot of money, buy a couple 6-packs and sit next to your computer and have at least a very similar playing experience anytime you want, 24/7. But back in the late 80s when Go Congresses started, it was the only way you could get that experience. There was no other way to have it, unless maybe you were, and even in Seattle or in New York, even those clubs, they didn't open till 3 or 5 in the afternoon. It wasn't all day, even if it was every day. I mean, I was at one time going to clubs 3 days a week, and I was driving all over the area to be able to play 3 times a week for 3 evenings. Mm-hmm. And now, of course, routinely, any evening, I play 3 or 4 games. Yeah. Every night.
But I would say, I think being able to... The human aspect of Go is something that is really important to me. I think it's the one thing that, if it was merely just playing online, I think you would lose out something. You could almost argue it's like playing the computer, because you're not engaging with the person. The one thing I said when they said, what's the most interesting thing about Go for me, it feels like you get to sit down with someone for like an hour and have a conversation. Right. It's commonly known in Japanese as hand talk, because you're doing this, and afterwards you can even have a longer conversation with them.
I completely agree with you. And in fact, I will address that on 2 levels. And this is the downside. The downside you haven't talked about, but I'll round back to what you're talking about, is from an organizational standpoint. I took over the Baltimore Go Club in around 1989, 1990. I've been the guy for 28, 29 years who's had to be there on Sunday nights, unlock the doors, set up the sets, and wait for people to show up. Right. Every Sunday night. Now, when I took this over, if someone didn't come to the Baltimore Go Club and open the Go Club, there would be no Go on Sunday night, and therefore someone had to step up, and I was happy to be that person. And for the same reasons that you've talked about, I love the face-to-face Go. I love to do that, and I continue to do it. But if I decided to stop now, would someone take my place? Again, before... Of course someone take my place. There's plenty of people that come to the club on a regular basis and are interested and would want to have the club continue. But now they can sit at home and play on the internet. Right. And so does the next generation, does the next person want to pick up that torch and run with it? It's a lot more difficult. It's the same thing with the Congress. As I alluded to, you can sit at home. You can watch more than one of the top games at once.
Right.
All day long. Actually, arguably, with less effort at least, understand what's going on better at the Go Congress than anyone who's not in the e-journal room if you're sitting at home in front of your computer. So as the prices of travel, as the prices of Congresses have gone up, a lot of the old codgers like me are amazed. Why aren't more people doing this? Well, it's because it's not the only game in town anymore in that sense.
That is true.
And so those are the organizational challenges that we have to face, because I think you're right. And I think you're right on 2 levels. First of all, Go is better face-to-face. I think Eric made some comments about that in his interview with you, that he, as much as he plays online for the fast games to get the experience, he goes to these big tournaments and he likes going to Asia so he can actually play face-to-face with people. Right. And so that's the challenge, because the internet both facilitates our ability to organize,
Mm.
but it also makes gives less of an impetus for people to raise their hands and volunteer to actually do things. And it mushrooms because unless you have clubs where people actually know each other in a face-to-face kind of way, it's hard to develop the type of bonds of trust and cooperation to actually make big things and big events happen. And so, that's the issue. The other issue where online Go is problematic, in my view,
Mm-hmm.
is in the area of manners. I mean,
I know what you're talking about, but go ahead.
yeah, I mean, it's funny if you ask people. I mean, I think the best thing about online Go, aside from the accessibility of opponents, is the review functions on
Yes.
so many of the Go servers. But putting those things aside, in the actual play between two people, a lot of people would say, "Oh, the best thing about playing online is you don't have to put the stones away." And I would say very strongly that the worst thing about online Go is that you don't have to put the stones away.
Explain. This is an interest. I've never thought of this like this.
Well, think about it. Think about your history of playing Go, and I've played Go a lot longer than you. But when you finish a game on KGS, let's say on KGS,
Right.
my general experience on KGS is I'll play someone a game, and there'll be usually an exchange of reasonable greetings, uh, and then you play the game, and then what I will get when I win,
Hmm.
is I will get resign, THX, gone
Yes.
before I can type thank you for the game.
Right.
Okay. Clearly, this is probably a person that's pissed off. They've lost the game, they're angry, they're upset, and they've done what I think every professional player will say is the key to getting strong, which is to get pissed off, don't review the game, and go on to your next game, because that's been proven over time to be the road to success for Go players. Now, I'm sure you've played people, I'm sure you've lost, and I'm sure you've won, I'm sure you've gotten upset, and your opponent's gotten upset. But how many times can you remember when your opponent was still really upset by the time you finished clearing the stones?
Oh, wow.
My experience is almost universally that we're laughing and joking
Right.
and friends again by the time the stones are back in the bowl. And to me, that is the experience that is lost online. And that is why, while online is great for the community,
Mm-hmm.
it is less than great for building the community.
That's a really interesting point. I've actually never thought of it like that. It is true that I've talked about it with other people, even with my teacher, that because she gets on my case about why didn't you review your game. It's like the last thing I want to do when I lose a game is feel bad about my game, and I feel the same way when I lose a game online. I say I'm gonna wait and not think about this, and I'm just angry. I'm just running away as soon as possible. Whereas when it's in a person-to-person setting, and by the time you clear it, it's almost like wiping the slate clean, and then you feel much better.
You can almost audibly hear it. The first couple times you throw some stones in the lid, it's like pound, pound, pound. And by the end, we're laughing like you and I are, and it's fine. It's fine. And yeah, by then you said, I messed that up. Yeah, you want me to show you that? Sure. Boom, 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 boom. And you've got a relationship. You've had the conversation. The conversation has ended successfully. Online, the conversation is aborted. It's cut short, and it's unpleasant.
I see.
And it's not polite to type THX and be gone before your opponent. I didn't know when you were going to resign. I wasn't ready to type.
Right.
That's not being polite. That THX is in fact, I end up feeling bad.
Right.
I didn't get to thank you.
Right.
You're gone. And do I chase you down and private message you? Half those people think you're a jerk for doing that.
That is true.
And yet, I will thank the person.
Right.
So
it is something that That is true, and the impersonalness of the internet definitely can affect that. For me, at least, I feel like the things I've seen, uh, maybe this does figure into it. It's necessary, but it is at the same time it's slightly problematic. Is that I'm guessing as well that the age range of the people who have been really picking up the game has gone lower as time goes on. I mean, we had Hikaru no Go, which introduced it to a lot of really interested people with anime and things, and people have taken it because of that. And then now, just because it's getting more slightly ubiquitous and people mention it even online, that people see. And with the younger set, they they might be able to take it quickly, but they also might lose it just as fast, and that's
Sure, and I think you're alluding to at least hoping that this is the rudeness of immaturity versus any actual learned behavior. I would argue that not all the people who are doing this, many of them I've played with long enough to know they're not still in middle school, and I wonder sometimes whether. It has more to do with the anonymity of being online,
yeah,
behavior that you would never dream of doing to someone's face. And secondly, and this is where someone might get irritated with me, but some bleed over from other types of online gaming where literally the goal is to kill the opponent and make him bleed, which is really not what we like to think Go is all about.
that is true. And well, I definitely see it from that, but I also see it from it affects the perspectives of people who there are kids who show up to our Go Club, and I'm like, you should try going to the Go Congress sometime. Or sometimes the kids show up, and I know that in maybe another year or two they're gonna have to go off to college, and it's for me the youth is really nice to see that people are picking it up, but it's also problematic because it's getting harder for me to find like for you someone to pass it on to,
Right.
and it's something that Eric Jankowski and the one we talked about, he says it's very important for a Go Club to have a very centralized core group of people that you can really rely on. And
Right.
I never realized that I was that guy at my club just because I just showed up every week because I thought it was interesting, and then it ended up being, oh well, since I'm here every week, I guess I'll take over some of it.
And you're in a place in your life where that's fine and well and good perhaps, but you reach points where my club meets on Sunday nights, and quite frankly, we have one of our core group is an Orthodox guy, so moving to another night on the weekend would be a real problem. We would virtually lose him, and yet now I've got a daughter who's not playing, unfortunately. The greatest shame in my life. But she's going away to college next year, and I want to be home Sunday nights watching Downton Abbey with her until that's over with. And so I'm starting to get pulled even. Although once she gets off to college, at least maybe until grandchildren, maybe I will have the freedom to continue doing it until, the inevitable senility hits in.
I hope that never happens, Keith.
Yeah.
But let's talk about from there. Let's talk about things that you've done for the Go community. I know you've done a lot of really useful and key things. You've hinted at the Baltimore Go Club. So let's start there. From my understanding, it's one of the older chapters.
Yeah, it's one of the oldest chapters, and we run the Maryland Open, which is the second oldest tournament in the country.
How many years is the Maryland Open?
I want to say this is going to be the 43rd this year.
Mm-hmm.
We skipped one year because we held the Eastern Championship, so we've been doing it for 44 years.
Wow. Let's start with the Go Club. How did the Go Club find its way into like your life, or like you being president of it?
Well, I mean, I learned how to play Go. I wanted to play Go. I had to find a place to play Go. Couldn't play online. And I was going to school in Baltimore, so I came to the Baltimore Club. Mm-hmm. I literally, when I bought my first house, bought a house that would be close to the Baltimore Go Club. and eventually, the guy who used to be running it was getting also an attorney, getting a law practice up and running, wasn't coming as often. And Sam Zimmerman, who was moving to Pennsylvania, one day at club just looked at the other guy and said, "Keith's in charge now." And that's been the situation ever since. So
That sort of mirrors mine because one day they said we're gonna register the Dallas Go Club and make it a club again. Who wants to be president? And I was the only one that raised my hand. And they're like, "You're president for life." I was like, "Oh, it's for life."
yeah, I tell you, there's not ever been an issue, with the possible exception of where there was an everyday Korean club fairly close to where I am, and there was an issue about whether we should just stop and merge with them.
Right.
But I did not want, we'd been meeting in the same place ever since I'd been involved. I didn't want to lose that. Also, I had connections with Recreation and Parks Department here in Baltimore, which gave me access to facilities for tournaments and so forth. So I didn't want to lose those things, and I was right, of course, because the Korean club came and went, and we're still here.
Are there any interesting takeaways that you would probably tell someone who's like, that were interested or found starting a club daunting? Is there anything that you think would be interesting to impart on them?
I think it's very difficult. I think it's a very difficult thing to do. I think, and I'm not saying, look at me, I did this difficult thing, because I didn't start this thing. It was an ongoing concern, and there was enough people that I've managed, not to screw it up, and it's still going. But I think the biggest thing is the issue of where to hold the club, and kind of the quiet contemplative versus the public and opportunity for exposure. Certainly for years, the Baltimore Club had its own space. It was very inexpensive. It was great. I won't go into the reasons why that's no longer the situation. And we had all those advantages. Right now, we are meeting at a Wegmans in a food court. And that's working out fine. It's working out really fine. I think it has some advantages. I have not seen the advantage of people walking up and showing interest to the extent that I would like. Even though there's an active bunch of people, in the area where we are, just hasn't been that way. But there are just advantages of the public space. Some people, you hold someplace, some people hold clubs in their homes. So that's very daunting for a stranger. If you know no one, you're going to come to someone's home. Yes. That's kind of problematic. Right. Similarly, little hole in the wall places, 3 steps up and 2 down and around the corner. That's daunting for the new person. Right. Being in an open place that's in public is in some sense inviting, because you can feel like, wow, I can even walk by and sit and read a book and just see, what these weirdos are about before I even raise my hand and introduce myself. So I'm hoping in the long term it'll work well, but it's still early days. We haven't been at this site for very long.
I see. Yeah, it's the location is something I've actually never. I've had the luck of not having to worry about it in a way. When I started, it was in a bookstore, and then we transitioned to another bookstore, and then now we're in a public space again. But it's slowly crept on me, talking with you, talking with Eric and Andrew, and even talking with Andy Oken, about how important location is. And because my big thing that I've learned that I strive with is just that it consistently happens every week. The consistency is a key. But Andy and I think you are saying a really interesting point, which is that Andy's point was that it's important for there to be another draw outside of just Go, because if it was just, I think his point was that if you went there and it was just, fluorescent lighting and just plastic tables with people silently playing over it, sometimes it doesn't foster some sort of community. as well as something public or loud where it can encourage you to talk with other people.
Well, and that was part of the reason ultimately we made the decision to separate from the chess club. We were originally on Friday nights and we
Mm-hmm.
moved to Sunday because the chess club wanted to have tournaments and they wanted to have quiet. And although often tournaments in the chess club led to fisticuffs eventually, but ultimately we were too noisy for them. So separating from that did allow us to be more casual and try and make it a little more fun and not just glaring at the board in silence. Um, but so yeah, but I don't know that we have other features other than Go in terms of what we've done.
I see.
But
Well, let's talk about something major, the Maryland Open then. When did you start handling that? About the same time that you
about the same time,
and
I've been running it. Yeah.
and I'm really curious about your thoughts about tournaments and stuff because I actually recently ran a tournament in Dallas. It was called the South Central Go Tournament. I did it along with Bob Gilman from the Albuquerque Go Club. It was really eye-opening to me, both as a way of just outreach and also as a way of just providing that thing that you say is missing sometimes with the online Go, is just a bunch of people being able to play each other and just being really open and talking about it. What are your thoughts about Go tournaments and sort of just and let's start with just general thoughts about Go tournaments.
Well, I think Go tournaments are great. I love Go tournaments on the East Coast. We when I first started, we were blessed by having many Go tournaments. I think we have a few less now, but we still have there are plenty of parts of the country that would kill to have the tournament scene that we have on the East Coast. I think attendance at tournaments is probably slightly down with a few exceptions. My tournament is held pretty steady. The New Jersey Open is a notable exception. They keep on growing. The proximity of the Feng Yen Go School plays a big part of that.
Right.
I think having it at Princeton University is just kind of cool. But they've been just having great success there at their tournament, which is in fact the oldest tournament in the country, the New Jersey Open. It started at Bell Labs long time ago. But, and the face of tournaments have changed. I mean, it used to be we had many more beginning players and weaker players playing in tournaments. It feels like now, at least with the more major events, again, putting aside the New Jersey Open, which is just wonderful, but we'll often not. Some people feel like I have to get stronger because they see the classifications online. I have to get stronger before I go to the tournaments.
Right.
So we're still doing pretty well with the stronger players. Also, the composition of players has changed. When I first started playing in Baltimore, all the strong players locally were Korean, and now they seem to be Chinese. Don't know exactly what the cause of that is, but certainly, I mean, New Jersey Open a year or two ago, there was like no Korean players in a almost 200 person tournament, and that just was unheard of when I first started. So there's been some changes in
200 people.
Oh yeah, I'm telling you, the New Jersey Open is a show. I mean, it's a show.
Wow.
It's bigger in terms of players than the Coatsen or anything short of the Congress.
Wow. When I started mine, I joked with a friend. Well, I came back to eat crow because of this, but they said, "Oh, how many people do you think are going to show up?" And I was so pessimistic. I said, "Oh, maybe like 30." And we had 43 people, and I was shocked that many people would show up.
Tell the truth. This happened, right? You thought you sincerely thought it was 30.
Mm-hmm.
You may have hoped it would be a few more, but as it got closer and people started saying they were coming, you were thinking 50 or 60 for a little while, and you ended up being disappointed at 43.
No, I still maintained that we would probably hit 30, and then when we hit 43, I also realized how close we would have come to 50 or 60, and I panicked. Uh,
Oh, well, yeah. If you're not ready, see,
yeah.
see, I am blessed with the fact that I could literally. I might be short on stones, but I probably have enough boards in this house to hold a good Congress.
I'm slightly envious of you, but slightly not. I have about 10 boards to the right of me, and in that same for that same
Wow.
reason.
I have 10 boards that actually. I have more than 10 boards that personally belong to me, but
Oh.
with club equipment, I could easily. I could easily board a Congress. I may not
Wow.
be able to stone a Congress, but I could board a Congress.
Wow. That I have to also ask with the Maryland Open, I think was it your idea or someone else's idea to do Stones one year, board another year, and then whose idea was that? Because
So
that sounds.
where'd you hear that?
Andrew Jackson told me that, and that seems like the
Okay.
most ingenious way to get repeat customers in.
Oh, it was not intended in that way at all. I mean, originally we did just books and some nice trophies. When I was running it, my father is a woodworker, and he would actually make plaques, and we would glue stones in Josekis, so they were actually go
Huh.
trophies, and people loved getting these go trophies. Um, but it was a lot of work. My father got older, etc., and so I decided to replace it with something nice. And thanks to uh, Janice Kim and Samarkand back in the
Mm.
day, and Yellow Mountain Imports now, um, I've been able to get some equipment reasonably priced. But the doing one or the other is just simply, I don't know. Boards one year, stones the next. It never occurred to me that someone would win a board and now I've led the seeds and they want to come back and win stones the next year. But I guess that makes some sense.
Yeah.
Maybe I am an accidental genius.
I think you are a genius.
Um,
But
but
that is interesting what you say about tournaments, and then also newcomers being hesitant about these things. I've heard a bunch of people say this um, about the Go Congress, where they're always worried about, oh, I want to be stronger before I show it. It's like, no, you're gonna have a great time regardless. The wonderful thing about this Go tournament that I ran was the reason I thought it would be a lower attendance was I didn't know if anyone wanted to make the time to come over and play in a tournament, but we were really lucky to have so many uh, lower ranks for people just willing to just show up and play Go. And
that's terrific. You really don't. The most important thing is to have somebody reasonably close in strength to everybody, so you have somebody who gets a reasonable game. The worst, and we promised we wouldn't talk about computer Go, which is the big thing. But back in the early days, when Bruce Wilcox had Nemesis, which was one of the first programs, he actually would have people enter Nemesis in AGA tournaments, and because he wanted to get it a rating for publicity purposes.
oh, I see.
And you'd have people drive 2 hours at a tournament and get paired against a program that they have on their computer at home, and they would get really angry and
Oh,
often quit the tournament and leave. So eventually we had to make rules at the AGA, and maybe this can segue to other things I've done with the AGA, but we made rules that you had to specifically announce. You can have computers play in your tournament, but you had to specifically announce that you're going to allow it. And pretty much that died out. People do not let the computers play anymore. That was a brief period where that went on. But I have done a lot of things with the AGA. I was a vice president for a period.
mm,
I was the quiz master with the journal.
mm.
I've run, back when the Fujitsu was a big tournament in Asia, I've run two of the Fujitsu qualifiers to pick the North American representative in those tournaments. I ran the 2001 Go Congress,
Huh.
and I ran an OZA tournament on the East Coast. I also was head of the policy and governance committee for a number of years of the AGA, and it was my group that came up with A lot of the credit goes to Rick Mott in terms of the idea, but in terms of hammering out the plan, my group came up with the governance structure that we have now, the way the chapter votes are weighted and the way the board of directors are selected and all those 9 yards was my group that did that. Currently, I'm on the pro committee that runs the pro selection process.
That's a huge thing that you've created.
Very minor part of that. And I'm also secretary of the American Go Foundation, which, as you know, is a charitable foundation that primarily is focused in trying to teach as many kids as possible and help support teaching programs and, to a lesser extent, clubs around the country.
Yeah, definitely. I remember when Andrew, the Go Clubs episode that we talked about, that what the AGF is doing to promote Go just within just teaching programs is amazing. Like, I never knew that you guys, if it was an actual teaching program that you could provide just a bunch of Hikaru no Go for them to read, which is a great way for anyone who's interested in it but doesn't know, just wants to learn a little bit more, just to read a comic book is really such a smart idea.
Yeah, it's been a real help. I'm not sure I think we're on the tail end of the Hikaru effect, but it was absolutely the biggest thing that's happened to American Go, maybe up until AlphaGo. We'll see.
Let's talk a little bit about the Go Congress. You said you've run one, and then how many Go Congresses have you been to?
Well, how many have there been?
I don't even know when that started. So.
I have perfect attendance at the Go Congresses. So cool. A carefully chosen phrase, perhaps. But I was at the first one. I was fortunate enough to have literally, my first tournament was the 1985 Maryland Open. And lo and behold, the Go Congress, I just finished law school. And lo and behold, the first Congress was going to happen right after I took the bar exam at my undergraduate school, which then was Western Maryland College, now is McDaniel. I still had one friend that was living on campus. I had no money. I slept on his floor.
Was it concrete or was it a carpet floor?
I suspect it was carpet. I think I had a sleeping bag. I don't remember. I just know that I was able to get there.
Right.
And by the time the second one happened, I had a job and I had this thing called vacation. What a concept. And I was able to get on a plane and go out to Seattle for the second one. And at that point, there was no way I was going to miss one. And that's continued. Although this year may be a little bit difficult. Keep my Go fans, such as they are, in suspense. We're going to China for 2 weeks, and that's a pretty big dent in the summer. But the dates don't conflict, so I can't imagine me not making an appearance. But perhaps being there the whole week might be a problem.
Has it been interesting to see how it's changed over the years? I remember.
Well, I almost thought when you talked about doing this, but I don't know how holding photographs up to the thing. I have photographs from the first Congress. I have the main playing room at the first Congress. And, it was the room where the main playing room was smaller than your tournament that you've just held at the first Congress. There were only 60 people at the first Congress. And I can remember I was in 8Q. And I remember looking at the range of players and thinking, man, if I can just get to 5Q, I'll be in the upper half of the field. And so I worked and got out to Seattle. I was a 5Q, and I got there and I saw the pairings go up. And I said, man, look at this. I just need to get to 2Q, and I'll be in the upper half of the field. The third Congress came around, and I was 2Q, and I said, I'm almost half the field. The bar kept on moving on me.
Right.
But, yeah, so it was 60 at the first one, and it was the biggest difference in those days, and this will just blow your mind. And, again, this is such inside football.
Right.
So the Congress tournament ran Sunday to Friday.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure we even had a Wednesday day off. So it was 6 rounds, just like it is now,
Mm-hmm.
Sunday to Friday. And then, depending on where the Congress was, the weekend was either the Eastern Championships or the Western Championships. So you had another 5 round tournament tacked on in. So you can imagine we're up in Mount Holyoke,
Mm-hmm.
right? Massachusetts, the third Congress, playing until, I mean, now it's actually for us old timers, it's the saddest thing about the Congress. They finish that round on Saturday morning and everything starts getting packed up and it's over.
Right.
Whereas we remember, heck, man, Congress tournament's over. We got 5 more games to make up for our screw ups. I mean, so what? We can still do this. But for the organizers, it was a disaster because you
Right.
were running games until 4 o'clock on Sunday afternoon, and now you got to shut everything down. It was terrible. I mean, driving back from Massachusetts, and Anders, mind you, if you remember, I told you at the third Congress, I gave Anders Kiroff a ride home. He had to get on a bus in Baltimore to head down to North Carolina. I didn't get him there till like midnight, and he still heading on. So
Man.
that was a huge difference. The fact that it was 2 tournaments, and I can't quite remember when that was done away with. I know in Rochester it was still that way at the
Right.
first Rochester Congress. So that was like seventh or eighth. But eventually we realized that was just insane and did away with the weekend tournament. Um,
I do remember talking with Chris Kirshner, also a venerable member of the AGA, and I remember asking him once about sort of the reasons it began, and I remember him saying the day off was something that I think he might have been a part of because he wanted to give people the extra breathing room, and it's interesting to see how with every year how much it might not change a lot every year, but it does seem to grow. When I went in Houston was my first Scouter Congress, and I think that was in 2002 or 2003, probably 2003. I think 2002 was New Mexico, but just comparing how things have changed since then, it's really impressive.
Yeah, but I think if you look at the numbers, it's been kind of flat for a number of years in terms of actual total attendance, particularly
Yes,
player attendance.
right.
Player attendance, in fact, is probably down. We have a lot of hangers on and non players these days that we never had in the past.
Mm,
Um, but I think you'll find that we need to do something to goose those numbers a bit because it hasn't been growing.
right.
Excuse
Yeah,
me.
definitely. For me, I was a huge benefactor of the Ing Grant back when it existed. It was the Ing Grant, for those who don't know, they would say that if you're under a certain age limit, you get a reduced rate for playing in the Go Congress, or I think if you were under 18, it was absolutely free, and
Yeah.
that really did motivate me to want to go try it out
Oh yeah, that was
because
that was that was great. And
because
they still try and do some things. I think the kids' activities on the Congress are still wonderful and much better than when we started out.
right.
Well, we didn't have kids. I mean, um, uh, it was so unusual to have a young person playing.
Right.
And now, you trip over them everywhere you go at the Congress. But
But it is also it's a funny aspect of it. I think you were touching on it with your first Go Congresses that we all have amusing stories about people coming in and trying to save money just so they can come to the Go Congress. I remember, I think it was Portland, Oregon. I stayed with Bob Felice and another, I forget his name right now, but Paul Benson, I think. And I asked you whether you slept on the floor, whether it was concrete or carpet, because I got to sleep on concrete. And let me tell you, it did not do me any favors. And I was very glad that year I was a non-player because I did not get a very good night's sleep those nights.
well, there used to be, we had a run of the Midnight Madness tournament, but I always talk about the first Midnight Madness tournament took place in the first several years of the Congress. There were 2 Go players, Robert Ryder, who at one time probably could have given any Caucasian player in the country 2 stones. He was five dan certified Japanese player, very strong, and Harry Gonsher, who eventually was also around five dan, but they were old men by the time the congresses started.
Mm-hmm.
And several times I can remember in the early congresses waking up and getting to the tournament site very early to see that they were there, and they had played all night. Normally, one of them asleep at any given time. And whoever was thinking would then slap the stone down hard, wake the other one up, and promptly go to sleep. And they would play all night that way for years.
That is extremely passionate, and I think that's so cool to hear. I play one game per day, and I'm tuckered out and angered out as a result. But that's so cool about the Go Congresses. We're hitting about the hour mark, so let's talk about you now. Let's start with the story of, I mean, how did you get introduced to Go, and why'd you start?
Well, this is the story I like to tell about how I got introduced to Go. I had still have actually, an aunt who was, your prototypical maiden aunt, and she took my brother and I to California when I was in the 6th grade, 12 years old, 1972, and we visited a friend of hers named Helen, a Japanese woman, Japanese American woman, who she had taught overseas with, and we spent 2 or 3 days at their house. I can remember to this day a beautiful Japanese garden, and her father lived there. And her father, if you've seen a picture of Kawabata, the author of Master of Go, with the shock of white hair, the guy looked exactly like that. And he had a Go board, and I was naturally into games and curious, and he taught me how to play. Well, it turned out that this guy, Helen's dad, had been the person who taught Peter Redman how to play. And from there was one of the first people who played with Michael Redman and started that career. And that is how I learned to play Go when I was 12, and then became one of the strongest players in the country.
Oh, wow.
The only problem with that story is that it is entirely true, except for the fact that Go never came up that weekend. I think I even played chess with one of Helen's sons, but no Go happened. I'm sure the Go board was there. I'm sure I saw it. And I did, in fact, meet,
everyone,
the teacher of Michael Redman's father during that weekend. But sadly, I, like everyone else, was walking through the student center at college, and there were a professor and a student playing Go in the student center, and I sat down and said, "What's this game?" Much later, and I peaked out at 5 dan, and have now, of course, begun my decline.
Oh, come on. So it was literally just you saw it and you just thought it was really interesting.
Yeah, I've always loved games. My brother was more into chess, but war games and things like that when I was young. And so I certainly had a competitive streak, and the aesthetics of the game for whatever reason, had an immediate appeal to me. And I was fortunate enough that a friend had like an old plastic Avalon Hill Go set that he'd been given, and he went home the next weekend and brought it back, and I started carrying that around, desperately challenging people and teaching people. Eventually the teacher actually gave a class on Go, and that gave me a few opponents. I didn't take the class, but I did attend a couple of them, and it gave me access to some players. And then ultimately, when I got out of school and in the summer, I was able to drive to the Go clubs and start playing that way.
Oh, cool.
But I would say I won my first game. One time the student had to leave, and I played the teacher, who was about 2Q. And he gave me 9 stones, and I'm sure the only thing I remember about the game is I'm sure I was boring him to death, but ultimately he missed that, like, a ridiculous chain of 20 odd stones were Atari, and he just missed it. I mean, he was only a 2Q,
right? But
I captured them and won the game. It was ridiculous. It's certainly not a situation where this guy had let me win. Right. It's certainly not a situation where I was brilliant. He just had a stupid moment at the right time for me in my first game. So I actually beat a 2Q at 9 stones in the first time I absolutely ever played a game of Go.
That is amazing. That's so cool.
It's kind of as unhealthy as going to a casino and winning the first time.
Hey, it got you. It must have got you hooked. And that's so cool that you could. Someone had a board that they just said, "Hey, I've already got a Go board, and you can hear it." Because for
Right.
me, it was getting gear was also always difficult. I think in the beginning, because now I think you can go to a Korean store and they hold them, but
Sure, sure, sure.
it
Well,
used to
I'm
be really difficult to
very difficult.
acquire one.
My mother, you know, God rest her soul, found out I was interested in this, and I don't know if it was the first Christmas or the second. No, it had to be pretty early on because I carted this thing around. It would be bad YouTube for me to run down the basement and bring it up here, but she found me a Go set,
Wow.
and it was wooden,
Yeah.
but it was marbles. It
Oh.
was yellow and blue marbles. And so the board was literally 361 drill press impressions.
Oh wow.
There were no lines. It was just the drill press impressions,
Hmm.
361 that you would put the marbles in. Perfectly functional Go board.
Right.
Perfectly good for teaching people who didn't know how to play Go.
Right.
Absolutely impossible to get a real Go player to want to play Go with you on this set. It's like going to a real chess player with your, Civil War chess set and say, let's play a game of chess. And they look at it like, no.
I'll tell you what. If I ever drop by the Baltimore Go Club, I will play you on that set.
Well, I spent years trying to find a big bag of I wanted at least to have black and white marbles, at least black and white marbles instead of the stupid yellow and blue things. Very annoying. So literally, I had these. They were in the Tupperware to carry these things around, and they were heavy. Were about this big, and carrying them around, and it was a nightmare.
Yeah.
But that was my first Go set. My mother got it for me for Christmas, and she was so proud. And I looked at it, and I was like, "Thanks."
It's one of those where you say, "What is it?" and then.
Oh, I knew what it was.
Oh, okay.
In fact, it even said "Go" on the outside of the box. So I opened it up expecting something different, but it was still immediately recognizable because there were little black dots on the Hoshi points.
Oh, okay.
So there was no mistaking it as the weirdest Go board that ever lived. But yeah, it was a Go board.
Cool. And what was it like learning early on with that? Because I've seen my first book, and the last book I'd ever really wanted for that was the Edward. Was it Edward or Edmund? Edmund, the Lasker book. The
Right.
And
Well,
that was a very difficult read for me back then. But that was in 2003. What was it like when you were really hooked and trying to learn?
I was fortunate enough. Compared to today, I was miserably unfortunate. But there was at least kind of an arm's worth of Go books.
Oh.
And in fact, the guy who ran the Greater Washington Go Club, people, a little bit of history. Hal Small, who you've no doubt met at the Go Congresses, is kind of known as the father of the Go Congress because it was kind of his idea to run the first Go Congress. But I always say that a lot of the credit goes to Art Lewis because Art Lewis took the dues meticulously. He sold books, and by the time Hal got the idea, why don't we run a Go Congress? There was a treasury with the Greater Washington Go Club that gave him the ability to take the gamble to do that. So I always think of Art, if Haskell is the father of the Go Congress, Art Lewis was the rich uncle of the Go Congress. But so there was a nice armful of Ishii Press books in those days. So I was, and the Go Worlds were already out. And Go Reviews, if you were lucky enough to get a hold of those, were still around. So there was a good source of material. It wasn't back in the olden days. Now I can try and show you what it was like for the first people who tried to learn this game.
Oh, you have? Oh, this is great.
So this is probably the rarest Go book in my collection. I don't know whether you can see this, but if you can read it out
Go
loud.
Battles of Modern Masters, 1905 to 1911.
Correct. So this is was created by Mr. Witt, W-I-T-T, the first president of the Go American Go Association, and it was put together in 1936.
Oh my god!
And this is something you might not even realize what this is called: onion skin paper. And the reason there were 6 copies of this book made, the reason there are only 6 copies, is it was typed with 6 carbons.
Oh my gosh!
So every word of this translation was typed, and these are the games, and the games are in algebraic notation.
Right. That's what the Lasker thing was. They used the L16 or something.
But this is simply a book of games typed like that. So thank the Lord that I'm not old enough that this is what I had to resort to. Because this is obviously very difficult to deal with. But these are famous games, like from the days of Shusai. I mean, you look over here, got my complete games of Shusai over here.
Oh, wow.
And then these are the early Honobo tournaments in the Japanese editions. But, yeah, I'm a big book collector. I'm a collector in general.
Right.
But, yeah, so there was also something called the Matsuda Go letters that was famous before my time. A very strong Japanese player mimeographed 2-page Go lessons, and you subscribed, and he mailed them to you around the country. And that was the way a lot of people got their information before Go Review came out in the 60s. So there were ways people tried to do things. But a lot of it was just getting things from Japan and not understanding what the stuff said, but at least being able to look at the pictures, as they say.
Cool. Okay. I'm gonna wrap it up with this final question. And
Okay.
Thank you again for being so gracious to do this.
No problem.
So you've played for about, we'll say 20 plus 30-ish years.
Math is bad. It's definitely 30-ish years.
30-ish. I'm
coming up on 40.
Wow. And I've played for about, I think, 12 or 13 years. What is it about Go that's kept you motivated to keep playing, or that really intrigued you? What would you say?
Oh gosh, I've answered this question so many times, and I think the answer is almost different every time. But I think I mentioned that there's an aesthetic appeal. Right. that I really liked. I like the as you've talked about, the hand taught cooperative nature of creating something, reminded of the wonderful Nakayama and his writings. If you read The Treasure Chest Enigma?
I own a copy, yeah. Okay,
yeah, where the 2 guys play an entire day's game and they only make like 9 moves. And he comments on the contented look on their faces, saying, "Look how far we've come today." But if I had to put my finger on it, and this dovetails back to the Computer Go match that is maybe ongoing when you get around to putting this up. It's the depth of the game. It's the fact that a beginner player can run into one of the guys at my club and learn the game and be passionate and be, already kind of a serious player and just be blown away by how strong this guy is. And then the guy turns around to me and he lays out 6 stones, and the look at the beginner's face is like, what? You take 6 stones? And then Eric walks into the club, and on a bet can give me 5 stones. And it's just the depth of the levels is just amazing.
Yeah.
And the fact that it never ceases to be interesting, that it can be fun played fast, it can be fun played slow.
Right.
It can be, I think it's a game that truly does reward being played seriously and studying, but you don't have to. I mean, there are some people that aren't that serious and still love the game.
Right.
And of course, by now, it's just truly in my blood. So many of my friendships, we talk about seeing people at the Congress. There's people at the Congress that my year would be completely depressed if I didn't see them at least once a year. And so, but I had to point to one thing. I enjoy the cooperative nature of the game, and I enjoy the depth of the game. And I enjoy how far I've come. I was interviewed for the Go Journal back when it was a print magazine, and I was asked, what's your fondest ambition? And it's funny. I'll tell this last quick double story. There's someone who shall remain nameless who was coming back from a huge event that I would have loved to have gone to. And I said, oh, God, I would just love to go to that event and just to watch, And the person responded like, well, I'd rather go as a player. And I, without thinking, blurted out, well, that's never going to happen. And then I realized there was silence on the other end of the phone. I said, for either of us, just not going to be, we were 2 already older guys. And this was, World Amateur Championships,
Right.
Once we moved to Ireland and became Irish citizens, we were not going to be national champions. And I could tell on the other end of the phone, I'm like, oh my God, this guy really thinks that could happen. Yikes. For me, I immediately realized, I didn't think I was going to get much past 3 Dan, but then I thought, maybe I can get a little bit better. And I reached the point where I thought, my goal, my ambition is not to win the US Open, not to win the Ing Masters, but to have the winner of the tournament have beaten me on the way to winning the tournament. And I actually achieved that. I lost to Hu Ren Yang in the first round of the Ing Masters the year that he went on to win it. So I have, in fact, achieved my life's ambition in Go and can fade off into obscurity. By losing that game, I climbed my own mountaintop.
Yeah, I have two things I've been recently thinking about with Go. I think the one thing that I would have, if I had to explain the really interesting way of talking about interacting with Go is, it's sort of like an interactive puzzle, and it's okay to do bad at it. And in that way, it's so interesting because you're interacting with someone else, and you're trying to find the right answer. It's like an interactive Sudoku where even if you write the wrong number, you can still keep playing Sudoku. And when I started to think about that, that's what really intrigues me about the game. And then on top of that, it's sort of like many other hobbies, be it like art or music, where you can always improve. You can always see how to improve just a little bit. And especially when a pro teaches you and just says, oh yeah, the move, it just needs to be right there. And once you see it, it always feels within arm's reach.
And you don't have to be, and the wonderful thing is you don't have to be there. I mean, you and I we've played a few games. I think maybe I usually win, but I think
you do.
I think we're basically the same. It just happens to be what's happened.
Right.
We're about the same level, and we're middling strong. But even when I was much weaker, you would have that experience. Easily 5Q can have that. Could never find the move in a million years, but once the pro puts it down, there's this shine. It's like, and that's the wonderful thing. And that's the wonderful thing about, I will pay this compliment to Eric. Every once in a while in those pro qualifications, he'd throw down one of those moves. I'd be sitting there at KGS desperately wanting him to win. And I'm like, oh God, he's got to play here. If he plays here, he's coasting. That's fine. And suddenly he'd put a stone down someplace up. I'm like, what? I'm like, dude, pro move. Dude, that's a pro move. Really great.
He's playing right now in the mind games, and
Yeah,
I
and he beat Ilya Shiksin.
yes.
So that was good.
But I was talking to him before one of his games, and I was talking about how frustrating and how interesting that that feeling is, where it's just instantly that learning, and how it sometimes always feels within arm's reach. And to what you said, he said basically the same thing. It's never ending, even
Oh
for
yeah,
him. He gets this thing where it's the answers are so simple, and I think it's things like that and things like the community and that just make it so rewarding. And anyone who's watching this and is ever really either curious or just frustrated or something, it has so much to offer, and it's just so cool to
and the frustration extends all the way up. I mean, going back to Nakayama, there's the other great story where Sakata is playing, and he's in a playing room with players to the right of him, players to the left of him, and he gets in a situation, and he says, "It's ridiculous. This is why I'm so terrible at Go." Of course, at the time, he's the greatest Go player in the world, and
right.
everyone starts laughing, and and he says, "Oh, now you're gonna laugh at me," and then Nakayama starts taking down notes and says, "Oh, and now you're gonna put it in the commentary." This is just great, It's just it's amazing. Um,
Definitely. I remember there was one of the questions I asked Hajin if pros are ever proud about the games they play, and she says every time you look right after the game when they review, you can never tell who won because they're both looking.
I watched that one. I think she said 99%.
Yeah.
99% they hate what happened. And yeah, in the review, you'd never know who won.
Right.
And that's the way it always is. I mean, and one piece of advice I give to Go players, we haven't talked about Go advice, but a lot of people bristle when people want to show off at the congresses their won games, and a lot of people say, oh, "Look at this show off! He won the game. Why is he wasting our time?"
Yeah.
In my opinion, if you're at any decent level, you can usually work out what went wrong when you lose.
Yes.
You might want to go and say, "Okay, I know things went south here." You might want to go to a stronger player and say, "Can you tell me what was the best thing here? Because I clearly screwed up." But when you're a weaker player, or even like us, and you won a game, you have no clue. It's much harder to figure out what you're doing wrong when it's working. So I always feel, analyze your losing games,
right,
and look for things you don't understand why you lose, but analyze your losing games, but really get help on your winning games, because you have no way of figuring out how badly you played when you win.
Yeah.
So that's what
yeah.
advice.
I joked with my teacher once, or with even other people. I said, like, okay, with the game I lost, show me how I lost. And then I say, with the game I won, show me how I should have lost.
Right. Exactly right. Exactly right. It's far more important to have a stronger player in that situation.
Yeah.
Because you can't. There's no guideposts for you to find your way.
Right.
Because that works with this guy every time. Doesn't make it right.
Yes.
Makes him really, really wrong. So,
well, Keith, I really want to thank you for joining me and doing this episode. I learned a lot, and it's always so great to hear about the history.
well, I appreciate it, and you're one of the interesting people that makes me want to come back to Go Congresses. And not only do we share Go, but we share a fondness for whiskey.
Yes.
Although you head to the Highlands and I head to Tennessee.
Yes. We meet up somewhere in between, though.
I'm not saying we couldn't enjoy the same ones now and again,
yeah.
But and we also like to write Go songs. So we have three things. That we enjoy together. And by the way, just to conclude, that's another reason for people who are more casually interested to get into this game. You and I are good friends, and we've never lived near each other.
Right.
You're a young happening dude. I'm an old codger. You make friends across all types of boundaries with this game. And that's a good thing. It's great for kids. They get to know adults. We don't have enough interaction between children and adults in this society. And Go is a way where that can happen very easily. I mean, Eric and I have been friends literally since he was 6 years old.
Wow.
And um, one of my best friends in the world, even then. And to this day, I have young guys, young people at the congresses. It almost seems weird. I mean, I've got, people come up to me and they're talking about grad school, and I say, oh, I've got good friends that have been looking at grad school. And they look at me like, what? But this game brings me together with people of all different ages all around the country.
Right.
I'll be the last defender of Facebook because to me, Facebook is the only way to keep track of my Go friends around the country. It's great.
Yeah, and that's really good motivation for anyone out there who's ever hesitant about joining a tournament or going to Go Congress, worrying that they're not strong enough. Because if you look at how we interact and how we talk about everything, the strength really, it's nice to play a close game, an even game, but it's even nicer just to have someone that that has this shared passion and common interest.
And some of the truly nine don players of American Go
Hmm.
have not been particularly strong players.
Right.
And what I mean by that, the people who have been the Sam Zimmermans and the AGA presidents and the people who have gotten us to where we are, yes, some of our stronger players have led us in a way, but the people that have done the actual work are very often not strong, and we couldn't have gotten here without them. So,
Cool. Well, thank you again, Keith, and
right.
we'll see each other soon. And everyone out there who's
Yes,
watching,
August.
I hope to see you guys soon. Thanks and bye.
Bye.